you going to do something? Just sit down. Down. Good boy. Good evening, and welcome to 3 Men in a Boat, Chapter 13, Unlucky for Some. Marlowe, Bisham Abbey, the Medmenham monks. Montmorency thinks that he will murder an old tomcat, but eventually decides he will let it live. Shameful conduct of a fox terrier at the civil service stores. Our departure from Marlowe. An imposing procession. The steam launch. Useful recipes for annoying and hindering it. We decline to drink the river. A peaceful dog. Strange disappearance of Harris and the pie. Marlowe is one of the pleasantest river centres I know of. It's a bustling, lively little town. Not very picturesque on the whole, it is true, but there may be many quaint nooks and corners to be found in it. Nevertheless, standing arches in the shattered bridge of time, over which our fancy travels back to the days when Marlowe Manor owned Saxon Algar for its lord, conquering William seized it to give it to Queen Matilda, ere it passed to the Earls of Warwick, or to worldly wise Lord Paget, the counsellor of 4 successive sovereigns. There is a lovely country around about it too, if, after boating, you are fond of a walk. Whilst the river is at its best here, down to Cookham, past the quarry woods and the meadows, it's a lovely reach. Dear old quarry woods, with your narrow climbing paths and little winding glades, how centred to this hour you seem with memories of sunny summer days. How haunted are your shadowy vistas with the ghosts of laughing faces. How, from your whispering leaves, there softly fall the voices of long ago. From Marlowe up to Sonning is an even fairer event. Grand old Bisham Abbey, whose stone walls have rung to the shouts of Knights Templars, and which at one time was the home of Anne of Cleves, and at another Queen Elizabeth, is passed on the right bank just half a mile above Marlowe Bridge. Bisham Abbey is rich in melodramatic properties. It contains a tapestry bedchamber and a secret room hid high up in the thick walls. The ghost of Lady Holly, who beat her little boy to death, still walks there at night, trying to wash its ghastly hands clean in a ghostly basin. Warwick, the kingmaker, rests there, careless now about such trivial things as earthly kings and earthly kingdoms, and Salisbury, who did good service to Poitiers. Just before you come to the abbey, and right on the river's bank, is Bisham Church, and perhaps, if any tombs are worth inspecting, they are the tombs and monuments in Bisham Church. It was a while floating in his boat under the Bisham beaches that Shelley, who was living at Marlowe then, you can see his house now in the West Street, composed the Revolt of Islam. By Hurley Weir, a little higher up, I've often thought that I could stay a month or so without having sufficient time to drink in all the beauty of the scene. The village of Hurley, 5 minutes' walk from the loch, is as old a little spot as there is on the river, dating, as it does, to quote the quaint phraseology of those dim days, from the times of King Serbet and King Offa. Just up past the weir, going up, is Danes Field, where the invading Danes once encamped during their march to Gloucestershire. And still, a little further, nestled by a sweet corner of the stream, is what is left of Medmenham Abbey. The famous Medmenham monks, or Hellfire Club, as they were commonly called, and to whom the notorious Wilkes was a member, were a fraternity whose motto was, "Do as you please." And that invitation still stands over the ruined doorway of the abbey. Many years before this bogus abbey, with its congregation of irreverent jesters, was founded, there stood upon the same spot a monastery of a sterner kind, whose monks were of somewhat different type to the revellers that would have followed them some 500 years afterwards. The Cistercian monks, whose abbey stood there in the 13th century, wore no clothes, but rough tunics and cowls, and ate no flesh, nor fish, nor eggs. They lay upon straw, and they rose at night to Mass. They spent the day in labour, reading and in prayer. And all over their lives there fell a silence, as of death, for nobody spoke. A grim fraternity, passing grim lives in that sweet spot that God had made so bright. Strange that nature's voices all around them, the soft singing of the waters, the whispering of the river grass, and the music of the rushing wind, should not have taught them a truer meaning of life than this. They listened there, though the long days in silence, waiting for a voice from the heaven, and all the day long, through the solemn night, it spoke to them in a myriad of tones, and yet they heard it not. From Medmenham to sweet Hambledon Loch, the river is full of peaceful beauty, but after it passes Greenlands, the rather uninteresting-looking river residence of my newsagent, a quiet, unassuming old gentleman, who may be often met about these regions during the summer months, sculling himself along in easy, vigorous style, or chatting genially to some old lock-keeper as he passes through, until well the other side of Henley it is somewhat bare and dull. We got up tolerably early on Monday morning at Marlow, and went for a bathe before breakfast, and coming back, Montmorency made an awful ass of himself. The only subject on which Montmorency and I have any serious difference of opinion is cats. I like cats. Montmorency does not. And when I meet a cat, I say, "Poor pussy," and stoop down and tickle the side of its head. And the cat sticks up its tail in a rigid cast-iron manner, arches its back, and wipes its nose against my trousers. It is all gentleness and peace. When Montmorency meets a cat, the whole street knows about it, and there is enough bad language wasted in 10 seconds to last an ordinary, respectable man all his life, with care. I do not blame the dog, contenting myself, as a rule, with merely clouting his head or throwing stones at him, because I take it that it is in his nature. Fox terriers are born with about 4 times as much original sin in them as other dogs are, and it will take years and years of patient effort on the part of us Christians to bring about any appreciable reformation of the rowdiness of the fox terrier's nature. I remember being in the lobby of the Haymarket stores one day, and all around me were dogs waiting for the return of their owners, who were shopping inside. There was a Mastiff, 1 or 2 collies, and a St. Bernard, a few retrievers, a Newfoundland, a boarhound, a French poodle with plenty of hair round its head, but a bit mangy in the middle, a bulldog, a few Lother arcade sorts of animals, about the size of rats, and a couple of Yorkshire tykes. There they sat, patient, good and thoughtful. A solemn peacefulness seemed to reign in that lobby, an air of calmness and resignation, of gentle sadness pervading the room. And then a sweet young lady entered, leading a meek-looking little fox terrier, and left him chained up there between the bulldog and the poodle. He sat and looked about for a minute. Then he cast his eyes up to the ceiling, and seemingly, judging from his expression, to be thinking of his mother, he then yawned. Then he looked around the other dogs, all silent, grave, and dignified. He looked at the bulldog, sleeping dreamlessly on his right. He looked at the poodle, erect and haughty, on his left. Then, without word of warning, without the shadow of provocation, he bit the poodle's leg, and though the yelp of agony rang through the quiet shades of that lobby. The result of his first experiment seemed highly satisfactory to him, and he determined to go on and make things lively all round. He sprang over the poodle and vigorously attacked a collie. The collie woke up and immediately commenced a fierce and noisy contest with the poodle. Then Foxy came back to his own place, caught the bulldog by the ear and tried to throw him away. and the bulldog, a curiously impartial animal, went for everything he could reach, including the hall porter, which gave the dear little terrier the opportunity to enjoy an uninterrupted fight of his own with an equally willing Yorkshire tyke. Anyone who knows the canine nature need hardly be told that by this time all the other dogs in the place were fighting as if their hearths and homes depended on the fray. The big dogs fought each other indiscriminately, and the little dogs fought among themselves and filled up their spare time by biting the legs of big dogs. The whole lobby was perfect pandemonium, and the din was terrific. A crowd assembled outside the Haymarket and asked if it was a vestry meeting, or if not, who was being murdered and why. Men came with poles and ropes and tried to separate the dogs. The police were called for. And in the midst of the riot, a sweet young lady returned and snatched up that sweet little dog of hers. He'd laid the tyke up for a month and had an expression, now, of a newborn lamb. Into her arms and kissed him, and asked him if he was killed, and what those great nasty brutes of dogs had been doing to him. And he nestled up against her and gazed up into her face with a look that seemed to say, "I'm so glad you've come to take me away from this graceful, disgraceful scene." She had said that the people of the stores had no right to allow great savage things like those other dogs to be put with respectable people's dogs, and she had a great mind to summon somebody. Such is the nature of fox terriers, and therefore I do not blame Montmorency for his tendency to row with cats, but he wished he had not given way to it that morning. We were, as I have said, returning from a dip, and halfway up the high street a cat darted out from one of his houses in front of us and began to trot across the road. Montmorency gave a cry of joy, the cry of a stern warrior who sees his enemy given over to his hands, the sort of cry Cromwell might have uttered when the Scots came down the hill, and he flew after his prey. His victim was a large black tom. I never saw a larger cat, nor a more disreputable looking cat. It had lost half its tail, one of its ears, and a fairly appreciable portion of its nose. But it was a sinewy looking animal. It had a calm, contented air about it. Montmorency went for that poor cat at a rate of 20 miles an hour. But the cat did not hurry up. It did not seem to have grasped the idea that its life was in danger. It trotted quietly on until its would-be assassin was within a yard of it, and then it turned round and sat down in the middle of the road and looked at Montmorency with a gentle, inquiring expression that said, "Yes, do you want me?" Montmorency does not lack pluck, but there was something about the look the cat gave that might have chilled the heart of the boldest dog. He stopped abruptly and looked back at the tom. Neither spoke, but the conversation, one would imagine, was clearly as follows. The cat: "Can I do anything for you?" Montmorency: No, thanks." The cat: "Don't you mind speaking if you really want anything, you know?" Montmorency, backing down the high street: "Oh, no, not at all, certainly. Don't trouble you. I'm afraid I've made a mistake. I thought I knew you. Sorry to have disturbed you." The cat: "No, not at all. Quite a pleasure. You sure you don't want anything now?" Montmorency, still backing: "No, not at all. Thanks, not at all. Very kind of you. Good morning." The cat: "Good morning." The cat then rose and continued his trot, and Montmorency, fitting what he calls his tail as carefully as he could into its groove, came back to us and took up an unimportant position in the rear. To this day, if you say the word cats to Montmorency, he will visibly shrink and look at you piteously, as if to say, "Please don't." We did our marketing after breakfast and re-victualled the boat for 3 days. George said we ought to take vegetables. That is, it's unhealthy not to eat vegetables. He said that they were easy enough to cook and that he should see to that. So we got 10 pounds of potatoes, a bushel of peas and a few cabbages. We got a beefsteak pie and a couple of gooseberry tarts and a leg of mutton from the hotel, and fruit and cakes and bread and butter and jam and bacon and eggs and other things we foraged around for about the town. Our departure from Marlow I regarded as one of our greatest successes. It was dignified and impressive without being ostentatious. We had insisted at all the shops we'd been to that things should be sent on with us and to wear. None of your, "Yes, sir, I'll send them off at once. The boy will be down with you before you are, sir," and then fooling around on the landing stage and going back to the shop twice to have a row about them for us. We waited while the basket was packed and took the boy with us. We went a good many shops, adopting this principle at each one, and the consequence was that by the time we had finished, we had a fine collection of boys with baskets following us around as the heart could desire. And our final march down to the middle of High Street to the river must have been as imposing a spectacle as Marlow had seen for many a long day. The order of procession was as follows: Montmorency, carrying a stick; 2 disreputable-looking curs, friends of Montmorency; George, carrying coats and rugs and smoking a short pipe; Harris, trying to walk with easy grace whilst carrying a bulged-out Gladstone bag in one hand and a bottle of lime juice in the other; greengrocer's boy and baker's boy with baskets; Boots from the hotel carrying hamper; confectioner's boy with basket; grocer's boy with basket; long-haired dog; cheesemonger's boy with basket; old man carrying a bag; bosom companion of old man with his hands in his pockets smoking a short clay; fruiter's boy with a basket; myself carrying 3 hats and a pair of boots, trying to look as if I didn't know it; 6 small boys and 4 stray dogs. Then we got to the landing stage, and the boatman said, "Let me see, sir, was yours a steam launch or a houseboat?" On our informing him it was a double-sculling skiff, he seemed surprised. We had a good deal of trouble with steam launches that morning. It was just before Henley week, and they were going up in large numbers, some by themselves, some towing houseboats. I do hate steam launches. I suppose every rowing man does. I never see a steam launch, but I feel I should like to lure it on a lonely part of the river, and then, in the silence of solitude, strangle it. There is a blatant bumptiousness about a steam launch that has the knack of arousing every evil instinct in my nature, and I yearn for the good old days when you could go about and tell people what you thought of them, with a hatchet and a bow and arrows. The expression on the face of the man who, with his hands in his pockets, stands by the stern, smoking a cigar, is a sufficient excuse of a breach of the peace by itself. And the lordly whistle for you to get out of the way would, I'm confident, ensure a verdict of justifiable homicide from any jury of rivermen. They used to have to whistle for us to get out of their way. I may do so, without appearing boastful, think I can honestly say that one of our small boats during that week caused more annoyance and delay and aggravations to the steam launches that we came across than all other rafts on the river put together. "Steam launch coming," one of us would cry on sighting the enemy in the distance, and in that instant everything got ready to receive her. I would take the lines, and Harris and George would sit down beside me, all of us with our backs to the launch, and the boat would drift quietly out to midstream. On would come the launch, whistling, and on we would go, drifting. At about 100 yards or so off, she would start whistling like mad, and people would come over and lean over the side and roar at us. But we never heard them. Harris would be telling us an anecdote about his mother, and George and I would not have missed a word of it for worlds. Then that launch would give us one final shriek of the whistle that would nearly burst the boiler, and she would reverse her engines, blow off the steam, and swing round and get aground. Everybody on board of it would rush to the bow and yell at us, and people on the bank would stand and shout at us, and all the other passing boats would stop and join in, till the whole river for miles up and down was in a state of frantic commotion. And then Harris would break off in the most interesting part of his narrative and look up with mild surprise and say to George, "Why, George, bless us, if there isn't a steam launch!" And George would answer, "Well, do you know, I thought I heard something." Upon which we would all get nervous and confused and not know how to get the boat out of the way. And the people in the launch would crowd round and instruct us. "No, pull right! You idiot! Back with your left! No, not you, the other one! Leave the lines alone! Can't you? Now both together! Not that way! Oh, you!" And then they would lower a boat and come to our assistance, and after a quarter of an hour's effort would get us clean out of their way so they could go on. And we'd thank them so much and ask them to give us a tow. But they never would. Another good way we discovered of irritating the aristocratic type of steam launch was to mistake them for a bean feast and ask them if they were Messrs. Cubitt's lot or the Montmorency Good Templars, and could they lend us a saucepan. Old ladies, not accustomed to the river, are always intensely nervous of steam launches. I remember going up once from Staines to Windsor, a stretch of water peculiarly rich in these mechanical monstrosities, which, with a party containing 3 ladies of its description, was very exciting. At the first glimpse of every steam launch that came into view, they insisted on landing and sitting down on the bank until it was out of sight. They said they were very sorry, but that they owed it to their families not to be foolhardy. We found ourselves short of water at Hambleton Lock, so we took our jar and went up to the lockkeeper's house to beg for some. George was our spokesman. He put on a winning smile and said, "Oh, please, could you spare us a little water?" "Certainly," replied the old gentleman. "Take as much as you want and leave the rest." "Thank you so much," mentioned George, looking about him. "Where do you keep it?" "It's always in the same place, my boy," came the stolid reply. "Just behind you." I don't see it," said George, turning round. "Why, bless us, where's your eyes?" was the man's comment as he twisted George round and pointed up and down the stream. "There's enough of it, see, ain't there?" "Oh," exclaimed George, grasping the idea, "but we can't just drink the river, you know." "No, but you can drink some of it," replied the old fellow. "That's what I've drunk for these last 15 years. George told him that his appearance after the course did not seem a sufficiently good advertisement for the brand, and that he would prefer to pump it out instead. We'd got some water from the cottage a little higher up. I dare say that was only river water as well, if we'd known, but we didn't know, so that was all right. What the eye does not see, the stomach does not get upset over. We tried Water River once, later on in the season, but it was not a success. We were coming down the stream and had pulled up to have tea in a backwater near Windsor. Our jar was empty, and it was a case of going without our tea or taking water from the river. Harris was for chancing it. He said it must be all right if we boiled the water. He said that the various germs of poison present in the water would be killed by boiling it. So we filled our kettle with Thames backwater and boiled it, and we were very careful to see that we did boil it. We'd made the tea and were just sitting down comfortably to drink it, when George, with his cup halfway to his lips, paused and exclaimed, "What's that?" "What's what?" asked Harris. "Why, that," said George, looking westward. Harris and I followed his gaze and saw, coming down towards us on the sluggish current, was a dog. It was one of the quietest, most peaceful dogs I have ever seen. I never met a dog who seemed more contented or easy in its mind. It was floating dreamily on its back, with its 4 legs stuck straight up in the air. And it was what I call a full-bodied dog, with a well-developed chest. On he came, serene, dignified and calm, until he was abreast of our boat, and there, among the rushes, he eased up and settled down cosily for the evening. George said he didn't want any tea, and emptied his cup back into the water. Harris did not feel thirsty either, and followed suit. I drank half of mine, but I wished that I hadn't. I asked George if he thought I was likely to have typhoid. He said, "Oh no." He thought that I had a very good chance of escaping it. Anyhow, I should know in about a fortnight whether I had it or not. We went up a backwater to Wargrave. It's a shortcut leading out of the right-hand bank, about half a mile above Marsh Lock, and is well worth taking, being a pretty, shady little piece of stream, besides saving nearly half a mile of distance. Of course, its entrance is studded with posts and chains, and surrounded with notice boards menacing all kinds of torture, imprisonment, and death to those who dare scull upon its waters. I wonder if some of those riparian boars don't claim the very air of the river and threaten anyone with 40 shillings fines for those who breathe it. But the posts and chains, with a little skill, will easily be avoided. And as for the boards, you might, if you have 5 minutes to spare, and there is nobody about, take 1 or 2 of them down and throw them in the river. Halfway at the backwater, we got out and lunched, and it was during this lunch that George and I received a trying shock. Harris received a shock too, but I do think that Harris's shock could not have been anything like so bad as the shock George and I had over the business. You see, it was in this way. We were sitting in a meadow about 10 yards from the water's edge, and we'd just settled down comfortably to feed. Harris had the beefsteak pie between his knees and was carving it. George and I were waiting with our plates ready. "Have you got a spoon there?" said Harris. "I want a spoon to help with the gravy." The hamper was close behind us, and George and I both turned round, each to get one out. We were not 5 seconds in getting them. Then we looked round again, and Harris and the pie were gone. It was a wide open field. There was not a tree or bit of hedge for hundreds of yards. He could not have tumbled into the river, because we were on the water side of him, and he'd have had to have climbed over us. George and I gazed all about. Then we gazed at each other. "Has he been snatched up to heaven?" I queried. "They'd hardly have taken the pie too," said George. There seemed weight in this objection, and we discarded the heavenly theory. "I suppose the truth of the matter is," suggested George, descending to the commonplace and the practicable, "that there has been an earthquake." And then he added, with a touch of sadness in his voice, "I wish he hadn't been carving that pie." With a sigh, we turned our eyes once more to the spot where Harris and the pie had been last seen on earth. And there, as our blood froze in our veins and our hair stood up on end, we saw Harris's head, and nothing but his head, sticking bolt upright among the tall grass, a very red face, and bearing on it an expression of great indignation. George was the first to recover. "Speak," he cried, "and tell us whether you're alive or dead. And where's the rest of you?" "Oh, don't be a stupid ass," said Harris's head. "I believe you did it on purpose." "Did what?" exclaimed George and I. "Why, put me to sit here, darn silly trick. Here, catch hold of the pie." And in the middle of the earth, as if it seemed to us, arose the pie, very much mixed up and damaged, and after it scrambled Harris. Well, tumbled, scrubby and wet. He'd been sitting, without knowing it, at the very edge of a small gully, the long grass hiding it from view, and, in leaning back a little, he'd shot over, pie and all. He said he felt no surprise similar in his entire life, and when he first felt himself going, without being able to conjecture in the slightest what had happened, he thought at first the end of the world had come. Harris believes to this day that George and I planned it all beforehand. Thus does unjust suspicion follow even the most blameless, for, as the poet says, who shall escape calamity? Who indeed? End of chapter 13. I hope that's been an enjoyable chapter, and I'm quite surprised with how quickly we're whizzing through the book. It should hopefully be finished soon, and then we need to find something else. Have a good evening, and we'll see you later.